Sean Diddy Combs' defense is requesting either a new trial or an acquittal altogether. Combs was found not guilty of the more serious sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy charges, but was convicted of transporting sex workers across state lines. Now his attorneys say his actions don't fit the crime. Let's bring in Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky and ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer for more. Aaron, what's the latest here?
So, Diane, his attorneys say that the way this was charged doesn't exactly match what Sean Combs did. And they say he's the only person who's ever been convicted of this charge, transportation for the purposes of prostitution, who hasn't benefited from the prostitution other than through voyeurism. They say voyeurism, watching other people have sex, isn't what this law was meant to address. Combs, they say, didn't profit from the prostitution. In other words, he was no pimp here. And he wasn't a John either. He didn't have sex with the male escorts. Instead, he brought girlfriends and male escorts across state lines to watch them have sex. And his attorneys say that that just doesn't fit what the law is about.
Brian, what would it take for a judge to agree to either a new trial or an acquittal here?
The judge really agreed to what the arguments, as Aaron Katersky laid out, were to be true, that the use of the Mann Act, or specifically transportation engaged in prostitution, has never been in the way it's applied here. This would be new precedent in many ways for both ways. If the judge was to agree that the Mann Act can extend to an individual who does not commercially profit from a sexual act or who does not participate in it, but it also would be precedent setting to dismiss or acquit Sean Combs of these two charges. The other aspect of it as well would be to look at this case and say that the information that came in from the racketeering conspiracy allegations or the sex trafficking, we're talking about the force, the fraud, the coercion, that infamous Intercontinental Hotel video would have been prejudicial towards Sean Combs if just looking through the lens of this transportation to engage in prostitution. That argument would allow for another trial. But I don't think it's going to happen at this level in front of Judge Subramanian. I think this is a stronger argument on an appeal if they bring it to a higher court.
So, Brian, is the idea that if you had just charged him with this and the trial was just about this, he would not have been convicted?
Yeah, that's the second part of the argument, that argument for a new trial. They're saying that if you had information like the Intercontinental video, the allegations of assault or coercion that would not have come in because they would not have been relevant as to, as the defense is arguing, the consensual recording of sex and transportation of individuals across state lines, that information would have not come in. And because that information did come in, it prejudiced Sean Combs. And for that reason, or at least for one of the many arguments, Sean Combs should be afforded a new trial.
Aaron, the defense is also trying to get him out of jail on bond or bail as he awaits the sentencing on this lesser charge. What's the latest on that?
Along the same lines, they don't believe that a conviction on this one count warrants his incarceration. The judge said that there is a presumption of being held without bond or bail when you're convicted of this crime, and that's what prosecutors pushed. The judge agreed. The judge also noted that Combs was violent, that the violence was depicted on the video. It was testified to by witnesses. The defense, what Brian says that none of that really should have applied to this one charge, so therefore let him out until he's sentenced on October 3rd.
Brian, the fact that the judge cited violence and that hotel video as part of the reason for keeping Combs in jail, could that help the defense with this larger argument that this other conviction should be dropped?
In some sense, yes, but what we're doing is kind of mixing apples and oranges as to what a judge can consider for bail purposes, where you're asking the question of whether or not a person is a flight risk or whether or not they're a danger to community. Judge Subramanian, looking at that standard, used the violence that he saw, that we all saw in this trial, to keep him in. But the different analysis for whether or not a charge should be dismissed applies in a different setting. That would be the apples and oranges again, where the violence should not have come in if Sean Combs was only tried for this one charge. And so they can kind of pick and choose their arguments differently as it applies to different standards. And yes, it overall could benefit them.
Aaron, what are you watching for looking ahead to sentencing in October?
Well, he faces, in theory, there's 10 years in prison. It doesn't seem like that's what the judge is thinking, because even though he found Sean Combs to be a danger and kept him in jail pending sentencing, he also challenged federal prosecutors to show him cases where anyone convicted solely of the charge of transportation to engage in prostitution was given anything along the lines of a 10-year prison sentence. And the defense certainly doesn't think those cases exist. Prosecutors haven't submitted anything just yet. They're going to push undoubtedly for a stiff sentence. The judge has taken note of Combs's violence. The defense says he is already talking about a batterers program, so he can probably do that without having to be in jail for any more than time served.
All right, Aaron Katersky, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both.